My husband said he was feeding a homeless man, but that poor soul was his son he'd hidden from me for 15 years. Hello, my dears. This is Martha Wilson speaking, 78 years old, with a lifetime of stories to share. If you're watching this video, prepare your heart, because the story I'm about to share shook the very foundation of my life and might touch yours as well. Before I begin, if you enjoy true stories, please do me a favor. Click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's following along with me. Now let's get to my story. It all began in Oak Ridge, a small town in rural Kentucky where everyone knew everyone. The year was 1972. I was 25 years old and had been married for almost 7 years to Theodore Wilson, the town pharmacist. For those who didn't live during that time, I should explain that a pharmacist was almost like a doctor in small towns. Theodore was respected, even feared. Tall, with piercing green eyes and that distinctive birthmark on the right side of his face that all the men in his family had, he was considered quite a catch. Young women would sigh when he passed by. Our marriage was arranged, as was common in those days. My father and his father decided it would be good for the families if we married. We didn't have love when we went to the altar, but it wasn't bad either. I respected Theodore, and over time I thought we had built a decent life together. We were what was considered a model couple back then. He worked, I took care of the house. Simple as that. One of my duties as a housewife was preparing meals, and I took pride in it. Even the wealthiest women in town said my beef stew was the best in the county. I grew rosemary in the backyard, used real bacon drippings, seasoned everything with lots of care. It's no coincidence that this dish became the central point of my story. Every Thursday, I prepared beef stew. It was routine, and every Thursday without fail, Theodore would leave after dinner with a carefully packed container, saying he was taking food to a poor homeless man. At first, this filled me with pride. My husband, so charitable. I would even add extra meat, an extra potato for the so-called homeless man. God will reward you for this kindness, Theodore, I would say, so naive. And he always gave the same response. It's nothing, Martha. It's the least I can do. And so it continued for years. Years. Imagine how many bowls of stew, how many Thursdays, how much time of innocence. A marriage routine has a way of settling in, doesn't it? You get used to things, stop questioning, accept things as they are. But over time, small details began to bother me. First, I noticed the excessive care with which he wrapped the container. It wasn't just any wrapping. He'd line it with a clean cloth napkin, one of those I'd so carefully embroidered. He'd tie it with string in a neat bow. Who does that for a homeless person? Then the amount of food. It was always a generous portion, as if this homeless man was a young man with a good appetite. But what really intrigued me was his refusal to let me accompany him or send more food through other people. I could go with you sometime, Theodore. I'm curious to meet this man you've been helping for so long, I'd suggest, and he always changed the subject. Better not, Martha. He's very shy, he's ashamed. If he sees a woman, he might get scared and not show up anymore. Or we could send the grocery boy to deliver food on other days too. What do you think? No, Theodore would respond irritably. He only appears on Thursdays at the arranged place. It's better this way. Don't complicate things. You can probably imagine that all this was raising suspicions, can't you? But in those days, a wife didn't question her husband much. We swallowed our doubts with our morning coffee and moved on. What really started to bother me was noticing that on days of heavy rain, Theodore would get visibly nervous. He would look out the window constantly, check his pocket watch repeatedly. Sometimes I caught him talking to himself. Will he be there? Will he find shelter? What kind of homeless person causes so much concern? Why did my husband care so much? These questions began to keep me awake at night. Then came that Thursday in June 1972. I'll never forget it. It was raining so hard it seemed like the sky was falling. One of those cold Kentucky winter rains, persistent, that soaks through to your soul. Theodore had been restless since early morning, looking out the window every 5 minutes. "Maybe today isn't a good day to go out, Theodore," I commented while serving dinner. "This rain isn't going to let up." "I can't miss it," he replied, almost without thinking. "He'll be waiting." It was at that moment that something clicked inside me. The certainty that there was more to this story than a simple act of charity. The way he said it, the urgency in his voice, it wasn't normal. We finished dinner in silence. Theodore ate quickly, took the container I had already prepared, protected it with waxed paper so it wouldn't get wet, and said he'd be back soon. As soon as he left, I ran to the phone. I called my dear friend Gertrude, the only person in town I really trusted. "Gertrude, I need your help," I whispered, as if Theodore could still hear me, even though he'd already left. "Tonight I'm going to find out where Theodore goes with that container every Thursday." Gertrude didn't ask questions. She was the kind of friend who understands when something is serious. "I'm coming over," she simply replied. Within 15 minutes, Gertrude was at my door with an old umbrella and an extra raincoat for me. We made up an excuse. If anyone saw us, we'd say we were going to church for evening prayers. Nobody would question two devoted ladies, not even in that downpour. We hurried out, trying to keep enough distance not to be seen by Theodore, but also not to lose sight of him. It wasn't difficult to follow him. With that rain, the streets were deserted, and Theodore walked purposefully, without looking back. He followed the main street, then turned right at the old sawmill alley and continued to the edge of town. My heart was pounding in my chest. Where was he going? There was no place where homeless people usually stayed around there. In fact, we were approaching an abandoned lot where there was only a small, improvised house at the back. They said that land belonged to some farmer who never came to town. Hidden behind a large tree, Gertrude and I watched as Theodore reached the small house. He knocked in a rhythmic pattern. 3 short knocks, a pause, 2 knocks, like a code. The door opened almost immediately. And that's when I saw him. A young man who seemed to be about 15 years old. Even from a distance and with the rain hampering vision, I felt my heart skip a beat. That boy was the spitting image of Theodore when he was young. The same long nose, the same thick eyebrows, and especially that birthmark on the right side of his face. "Good Lord in heaven," whispered Gertrude beside me, noticing the same thing I did. But what really confirmed my suspicions was when we heard Theodore calling the boy. "Son, I brought your dinner. Come in quickly. It's too cold out here, son." Those words fell like a stone in my chest. The young man hugged Theodore with familiarity, and they both entered the house. The door remained ajar, and the window without curtains allowed us to partially see the interior. It was a simple place, but clean and organized. There were books on a table, notebooks, a studious young man. "Your beef stew is still the best of all, Dad," we heard the boy say. "I wait for it all week." "Your mother always knew how to cook like nobody else," Theodore responded. "Darlene would be proud to see how you've grown, how well you're doing in school." Darlene. The name hit me like lightning. Darlene had been the young woman who worked in our house as a maid years ago. A pretty girl, with dark skin and large eyes, who disappeared suddenly. Theodore said she had returned to her hometown in another state. That was almost 16 years ago. The dates matched perfectly. The maid who vanished, the 15-year-old boy, the beef stew I made that he said was like Darlene's. "How did I not realize before, Gertrude?" I whispered to my friend, feeling tears mixing with the raindrops running down my face. The two of us returned home under that merciless rain. Each drop that fell felt like a stab to my heart. 16 years of lies. 16 years believing in the goodness of a man who was hiding a son from me, a son he had with our maid while married to me. You must be wondering what I did next. If I confronted Theodore as soon as he returned home. If I made a scene, as would be expected. But no. The pain and anger were there, boiling inside me, but I decided to act with caution. I needed to know more. I needed to understand the whole story before making any decision. And that's how, my dears, the castle of lies that was my marriage began to crumble, all because of a simple bowl of beef stew that I prepared every Thursday. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. After that rainy night when I discovered Theodore's hidden son, I returned home, soaked not just by the rain, but by the tears I couldn't contain. Gertrude, my faithful friend, accompanied me and insisted on staying, fearing what I might do in the state I was in. But I asked her to leave. I needed to be alone, needed to think. "Are you sure, dear?" she asked worriedly. "I'm sure, Gertrude. I won't do anything crazy. I just need to get my head straight." When Theodore returned about an hour later, I pretended to be asleep. I couldn't look at him without falling apart or exploding with rage. I spent the whole night awake, tossing and turning in bed, replaying every moment of the last 16 years, looking for signs I didn't see, clues I ignored. How could I have been so blind? The next day, I maintained my routine normally. I served breakfast, tidied the house, prepared lunch. Theodore didn't suspect anything. Men like him rarely notice the storm forming inside a silent woman. On Sunday, 3 days after the discovery, I made a decision that would change everything. While Theodore was at the bar playing dominoes with friends, his Sunday afternoon ritual, I took some of the savings I kept hidden. Oh, yes, every woman of that era had her secret stash. Then I returned alone to that little house. My heart was beating so hard I thought it would come out through my mouth when I knocked on the door. 3 short knocks, a pause, 2 knocks. The same code I'd seen Theodore use. The door opened, and there he was, the boy. Seeing him up close, the resemblance was even more striking. It was like looking at a photograph of young Theodore, but with Darlene's large, expressive eyes. "Who are you, ma'am?" he asked fearfully, starting to close the door. "Wait," I pleaded. "My name is Martha. I'm Theodore Wilson's wife." The fear that took over that boy's face broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. He turned pale and began to tremble. "I have nothing to do with your husband, ma'am. He just brings me food sometimes because he feels sorry for me. I'm an orphan. I live alone." That was the story Theodore had surely instructed him to tell if anyone showed up. A rehearsed lie, but poorly told. The boy didn't know how to lie. "I know who you are," I said firmly, but without hostility. "I know you're Theodore's son with Darlene, who worked in my house years ago." His eyes filled with tears. He lowered his head, defeated. "I didn't want to cause problems," he mumbled. "Dad said nobody could know about me, that it would be a scandal, that it would ruin his life and yours too." I asked to come in. I needed to hear the whole story, needed to understand. The boy, Jeremy was his name, timidly invited me in. The little house was simple but clean and organized. It had just one large room that served as bedroom and living room, a small kitchen, and a makeshift bathroom. On the walls were framed school certificates. On the table, textbooks. A studious boy, no doubt. "Can you tell me everything?" I asked, sitting in one of the 2 chairs at the table. "I promise I won't hurt you. I just need to know the truth." And then Jeremy told me. With the innocence of his 15 years, he revealed the entire story that Theodore had told him over the years. Darlene became pregnant while working in our house. When she found out, Theodore hid her in that remote house so no one in town would know. He feared the scandal, the public shame. A respected man like him, with a maid for a mistress, would be his social ruin. During the pregnancy, he visited her in secret, bringing food and money. When Jeremy was born, the complications from childbirth were severe. Without proper medical care, Theodore wouldn't take Darlene to the town hospital to avoid raising suspicions. She died 3 days later, leaving the baby motherless. Theodore considered giving the child up for adoption, but didn't have the courage. He was his son, after all. So he arranged for a woman to care for the baby in that same house. He paid her well to keep the secret. As Jeremy grew, Theodore dismissed the caretaker and increasingly left the boy on his own. By age 10, Jeremy was already spending entire days without adult supervision. Theodore enrolled him in a school in a neighboring district, inventing a story about being his uncle and legal guardian. He visited his son only once a week, Thursdays, when he brought food, some money, and checked if everything was okay. He says he loves me, Jeremy concluded with tears in his eyes. But I've never been able to call him Dad in public, never been able to go to his pharmacy, never been able to tell anyone who I really am. As I listened to that absurd story, a deep anger grew inside me, not directed at that innocent boy, but at the man I called my husband. How could he be so cruel? How could he deny this boy a real family, a normal life? But there was more. Jeremy showed me the only object he had from his mother, a small locket with Darlene's picture inside. It was indeed her, the girl who worked in my house. On the back of the locket was an inscription with the initials DA and TW, Darlene Adams and Theodore Wilson, and a date, May 12, 1956. A love token, no doubt. She loved him very much, Jeremy said. Dad told me she dreamed of forming a family with him, but knew it was impossible. That was like a stab to my chest. 1956. I married Theodore in 1965. This meant that his relationship with Darlene began long before our marriage and continued afterward behind my back. It wasn't just a momentary betrayal, a slip-up. It was a parallel relationship, perhaps a true love that he kept hidden from everyone. Jeremy, I said, holding his hands in mine. You are not to blame for any of this. You're a victim just as much as I am, and from today on, your life will change. I returned home determined. I wouldn't confront Theodore immediately. I needed a plan. I needed to prepare. Anger could make me make mistakes, and I didn't want mistakes. I wanted justice. I spent the entire week pretending normalcy, but inside, I was planning every detail of what I would do. The following Thursday, I prepared the beef stew, as always. When Theodore took the container to leave, I just smiled and wished him a good evening. He didn't notice anything different in my behavior. Men like him rarely notice the subtle changes in a wounded woman. I waited for him to leave and then did something I had never done before. I went to his office, a small room at the back of the house where he kept his documents. I opened drawers, searched through papers, looked for any additional evidence of that parallel life he maintained. And I found it. In a folder hidden at the bottom of the last drawer of the desk, I discovered monthly payment receipts to the caretaker who stayed with Jeremy in the early years, receipts from the school where the boy studied, even a birth certificate where only Darlene's name appeared as mother, and father unknown. But the worst was yet to come. Among the documents, I found a letter written by Darlene days before she died. A farewell letter, as if she sensed she wouldn't survive childbirth. In it, she begged Theodore to take care of their son, to give him love and a dignified life. And at the end, she revealed that Theodore had promised to leave me to be with her, but never kept that promise. I know you love Martha in your way, she wrote, but I also know you love me differently, more deeply. Why didn't you have the courage to follow your heart? Why have you kept me hidden all these years? Now it's too late for me, but not for our son. Give him the name he deserves, the life he deserves. I cried like I had never cried before as I read those words. Not just because of the betrayal, but because of the cruelty, the cowardice. Theodore had deceived us all. Me, Darlene, and his own son. When he returned, I was sitting in the living room waiting, the documents and letters spread across the table. His face paled at the sight. He tried to stammer some explanation, but I interrupted him. I don't want to hear any more lies, Theodore. I know everything. I've been with Jeremy. I saw the locket with your inscription and Darlene's photo. I read her letter. I know your affair began even before we were married. I know you promised to leave me to be with her. I know you let her die without assistance to protect your reputation. I know you've kept your son hidden like a dirty secret all these years. He fell onto the couch without strength, without words. For a few minutes we sat in silence, just the sound of the wall clock marking the seconds of our destruction. What are you going to do? He finally asked, his voice barely audible. What should have been done 15 years ago, I answered, with a firmness I didn't know I possessed. I'm going to bring Jeremy to the place he deserves. I'm going to give him the name that is his by right. And as for us, there is no more us, Theodore. That's how, my dears, I confronted the man who had destroyed 3 lives with his lies. Mine, Darlene's, and Jeremy's. But the story doesn't end here. In my next video, I'll tell you how I transformed this tragedy into a new beginning, how I rebuilt my life and Jeremy's, and what fate had in store for Theodore. After that night when I confronted Theodore with all the evidence of his betrayal, our house became a silent battlefield. We decided to keep up appearances for the time being. It was 1972, in a small Kentucky town, where divorce was almost a forbidden word. A separated woman carried a terrible stigma, as if she had a mark on her forehead. Theodore begged me not to reveal anything to anyone, especially about Jeremy. He feared the scandal, the shame, the loss of respect in the community. "Please, Martha, this will destroy my reputation," he pleaded. It was always his reputation that mattered, never the feelings of others. "Don't worry, Theodore," I replied, with a calmness that frightened him. "I won't go around shouting your dirty story all over town. I'm going to do something much worse." In the days that followed, I meticulously elaborated my plan. First, I went to visit my sister Claudia, who lived in Louisville, a larger city 2 hours away. I explained the situation and asked for help. Claudia, who had always been my safe harbor, didn't hesitate to accept my proposal. Jeremy would temporarily live with her to continue his studies, away from Theodore's reach and influence. When I returned, I presented my conditions to Theodore. These weren't suggestions or requests, they were demands. First, Jeremy will be legally recognized as your son. You will acknowledge paternity and give him your last name. "But Martha, the entire town will," I interrupted, ignoring his protests. "Second, you will transfer half your assets to my name, including part of the pharmacy." "The pharmacy is my family's inheritance. You can't demand that." "Third, Jeremy will live with my sister in Louisville to finish his studies. You will finance everything, school, clothes, food, even college if he wants. This will ruin me financially. Fourth, you will sleep in the back room starting today. I no longer want to share a bed with a man who has no character." He looked at me in disbelief. He probably never imagined that the submissive wife I had been for so many years could transform into the determined woman standing before him. "And if I refuse?" he asked, trying to regain some control of the situation. I opened my purse and removed an envelope. "In that case, these copies of all the documents, Jeremy's birth certificate, the school receipts, Darlene's letter, and some photographs I took of the house where you hid your son, will be delivered to Pastor Anthony, Sheriff Joshua, and my father." Theodore's face paled. He knew I wasn't bluffing. My father, a severe and traditional man, would be capable of killing him if he discovered how he had treated his daughter. The pastor and the sheriff would ensure the story spread throughout the region. It would be the end of everything he valued. "You have until tomorrow to decide," I finalized, leaving him alone with his thoughts. The next morning, I found Theodore sitting at the kitchen table, red-eyed from lack of sleep. He seemed to have aged 10 years in one night. "I accept your conditions," he mumbled, defeated. "But how will we explain the sudden appearance of my 15-year-old son to the town?" That's when I revealed the last part of my plan, the one that would be my true revenge. "We'll say that Jeremy is your nephew, an orphan, the son of a brother of yours who lived far away. Since he has no one else in the world, we decided to adopt him." "That could work," he agreed, glimpsing a less humiliating way out. But I continued with a smile that made him tremble. "After everything is formalized, after Jeremy is safe with my sister and his future secured, after you transfer the assets to my name, then, my dear, the entire town will know the truth, not from my mouth, but from yours." "What do you mean?" "You yourself will confess everything, Theodore, when the time is right." He didn't understand at that moment, but I knew exactly what I was doing. My revenge wouldn't be quick and explosive. It would be slow, calculated, a psychological torture that would consume him bit by bit. In the weeks that followed, we put the plan into action. Theodore prepared the documents to transfer part of the assets to my name. I, in turn, went to get Jeremy and took him to meet my sister in Louisville. The boy, initially frightened by so many changes, soon became enchanted with the prospect of a normal life, a real home, a family. "Are you going to be like my mother?" he asked me timidly during the trip. That question caught me off guard. Until then, I had been acting driven by anger, by the desire for revenge against Theodore. I hadn't really considered my relationship with Jeremy, beyond getting him out of that terrible situation. "If you want," I answered honestly. "I'm not your biological mother, Jeremy. I will never replace Darlene, but I can take care of you, ensure you have a good education, a dignified future." "I'd like that," he said with a shy smile. "You're already doing more for me than anyone has ever done." At that moment, something changed inside me. I realized that Jeremy wasn't just an instrument of my revenge against Theodore. He was a person, an innocent boy who deserved love and care. And I decided that, regardless of what happened to my marriage, I would be a mother to him. When we returned to Oak Ridge, we already had the story ready to explain the newly arrived nephew. Theodore announced at Sunday Mass that his older brother, who never actually existed, had passed away, leaving a teenage son. As good Christians, we would welcome him as a son. The entire town showed compassion. The church ladies praised me for the kindness of accepting to raise another woman's child. The men patted Theodore on the back, admiring his sense of family responsibility. If only they knew the truth. Jeremy stayed with us for just 2 weeks before leaving for Louisville. In this short period, I made a point of introducing him to everyone, taking him to church, to the square, to the best houses in town. I wanted them to clearly remember that face, so similar to Theodore's, for when the truth came to light. Weeks turned into months, months into years. Theodore and I lived like strangers in the same house. He slept in the small back room, as agreed. On the rare occasions when we spoke, it was about practical matters. Bills to pay, house repairs, the money we sent monthly to Jeremy. At the pharmacy, where I began working daily after demanding my share, we maintained the facade of a respectable couple. I smiled at customers. He prepared the medicines. No one suspected the Cold War we were living at home. Meanwhile, Jeremy flourished in Louisville. I received letters from him every 2 weeks, telling about school, new friends, plans for the future. His gratitude and affection were evident in every written word. I visited him whenever I could, bringing gifts, encouraging his studies. Theodore never went along. Part of our agreement was that he would keep his distance from the boy unless Jeremy expressly wished to see him. In 1975, 3 years after the discovery, I received the news I had been waiting for. Jeremy had been accepted to medical school at the University of Kentucky in Lexington. My heart overflowed with pride. That boy I had found hidden in a small house at the edge of town would now become a doctor. It was at this moment that I decided it was time for the second phase of my revenge. I organized a big party at our house to celebrate Jeremy's acceptance to medical school. I invited all the important families in town, the pastor, the mayor, everyone who made up the social elite that Theodore valued so much. "Why are you doing this?" Theodore asked suspiciously. It was the first time in years he had seen me excited about something related to our social life. "Because I'm proud of our son," I replied, emphasizing the last words. On the day of the party, our house was impeccable. I hired the best cooks in the region. I ordered a magnificent cake, decorated everything with flowers. Jeremy arrived from Louisville, accompanied by my sister, elegant in a new suit that I had bought especially for the occasion. When all the guests were present, I took a crystal glass and tapped it lightly with a spoon to get attention. The chatter ceased, and all eyes turned to me. "Dear friends and neighbors," I began in a clear voice, "thank you all for your presence at this very special celebration. As you know, we are celebrating Jeremy's acceptance to medical school." Polite applause echoed through the room. I smiled and continued. Many of you met Jeremy 3 years ago when he arrived in Oak Ridge. At the time, we said he was Theodore's nephew, the son of a deceased brother. I noticed Theodore turning pale in a corner of the room. He knew what was coming. But today, with a heart full of pride, I want to share the truth with all of you. Jeremy is not Theodore's nephew. He is his son. A murmur of surprise ran through the room. I saw confused looks, raised eyebrows. Jeremy was born before our marriage, I continued, slightly deviating from the truth to preserve a bit of my own dignity. Due to difficult circumstances, he grew up away from us, but now it's time to publicly recognize him as a legitimate Wilson. I turned to Theodore, who looked about to faint. My husband would like to say a few words. I had backed him against the wall in front of the entire society he had tried so hard to impress for years. He couldn't contradict me without looking even worse. He couldn't flee. He was cornered. With trembling legs, Theodore approached. For a moment, I thought he would faint right there. But then, surprisingly, he straightened his posture and spoke. It's true. Jeremy is my biological son. His mother died in childbirth and, out of cowardice, out of fear of judgment, I kept him away. It was the biggest mistake of my life, one I deeply regret. I looked at him, shocked by the spontaneous confession. It was more than I expected. Martha, he continued, turning to me, accepted Jeremy as a son when she learned the truth. She had the courage and heart that I lacked. If he is becoming a doctor today, the credit is much more hers than mine. Silent tears ran down Jeremy's face, who never imagined being publicly acknowledged by his father. The guests were astonished, divided between the scandal of the revelation and the apparent nobility of my acceptance of my husband's son with another woman. That's how, my dears, I executed my revenge, not with screams or violence, but by exposing Theodore to what he feared most: social judgment. From that day on, whispers followed him everywhere. People speculated about who Jeremy's mother might be when the affair had happened, if there were other hidden children. His reputation, so carefully constructed, crumbled in one night. But something unexpected also happened. Over the years of living with Jeremy, even if intermittently, I developed a true love for him. He was no longer the instrument of my revenge. He was my son in my heart. And seeing him follow the path he chose, becoming a good and honest man despite everything, brought me a joy that surpassed any satisfaction revenge could offer. In the following years, Theodore withered away. The strong and respected man became a shadow. At the pharmacy, I was the one giving orders now, relegating him to minor tasks in the back of the establishment. At home, we lived like strangers who shared a roof out of convenience. His health began to deteriorate. First came the heart problems, then a deep depression. He started drinking secretly in his small back room. I would find empty bottles when I went to clean, but never mentioned anything. It was his form of escape, I suppose. In 1985, Jeremy graduated from medical school. I organized another big party, even larger than the first. I invited people from all the neighboring towns. It was at this celebration that, while proudly introducing Jeremy to a group of important doctors from the capital, I referred to him simply as Theodore's son, without the adopted we sometimes still used as a facade in formal situations. 3 months after this party, Theodore died of a heart attack. I found him collapsed on the pharmacy floor when I opened in the morning. I immediately called for help, but it was too late. They say in town that he died of shame and remorse. Perhaps it was just a weak heart and alcohol. At the funeral, few people attended. Most came out of consideration for me, not for the deceased. I wore black as tradition dictates and maintained a solemn appearance, but I didn't cry. My tears for Theodore had dried up many years ago, on that rainy night when I discovered his betrayal. Ironically, the only one who shed sincere tears at the funeral was Jeremy. Despite everything, he had developed an affection for the father who visited him in secret throughout his childhood. A complex bond, made of crumbs of attention, but still a bond. He was a weak man, Mom, Jeremy told me after the burial, calling me Mom as he had been doing in recent years. But I think in his way, he loved us. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps Theodore, in his confused heart, loved both me and Darlene, both Jeremy and his precious reputation. But love without courage, without honesty, without sacrifice, what kind of love is that? After the funeral, I sold the pharmacy. I had no more reason to stay in Oak Ridge. Jeremy had secured a good position as a doctor in Chicago and invited me to live with him. I accepted without hesitation. It was time for a new beginning. And so, my dears, I come to the end of this chapter of my story, a painful chapter, but one that transformed me into the woman I am today. Theodore's betrayal could have destroyed me, but instead, it gave me a son whom I deeply love and a strength I never imagined having. Today, at 78, I live with Jeremy, his wife Marianne, and my 2 beloved grandchildren in Chicago. And every Thursday, I still make a point of preparing the same beef stew, no longer as a reminder of a betrayal, but as a celebration of the family we built from the ruins of a broken marriage. Life has a way of working out, doesn't it? Sometimes, what seems like our greatest misfortune ends up being the path to our greatest blessing. The secret is not to let yourself be defeated by pain, but to use it as fuel to move forward. Moving to Chicago in 1985 at the age of 50 was like being born again. Just imagine a small-town lady used to the slow pace of Oak Ridge, suddenly immersed in the hustle and bustle of one of America's largest cities. In the first few days, I confess I was bewildered. The noise of the cars, the number of people on the streets, buildings so tall you could barely see the sky. Everything was so different from my little Kentucky world. Jeremy lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park, a beautiful, tree-lined neighborhood that reminded me a little of the countryside. He had insisted I take the master bedroom with a large window overlooking a park. "You deserve the best, Mom," he would say. I still got emotional when he called me that. Mom, such a simple word but one that carried so much meaning for both of us. In the first few months, while Jeremy worked at the hospital, I dedicated myself to arranging the apartment, cooking, and exploring the neighborhood. I befriended Mrs. Conway from the neighboring apartment, a widow from Tennessee who became my guide in that concrete jungle. She taught me how to ride the L, how to haggle at the farmer's market, how to find the best prices in downtown stores. "Martha," she told me one day, "women like us can't stay idle. We need to have a goal, an occupation." And she was right. Despite the comfort of my new life, I missed feeling useful, productive. At the pharmacy in Kentucky, even in the difficult years of my marriage to Theodore, I always had my role, my place. In Chicago, I was just Dr. Jeremy's mother, the small-town lady who knew nothing about the big city. Then, one afternoon in September 1986, I had an idea while preparing lunch. Jeremy had brought a doctor colleague home to eat, and the young man couldn't stop praising my food. "Mrs. Wilson, this beef stew is the best I've ever eaten in my life. You should open a restaurant." I laughed at the comment at the time, but the seed was planted. Why not? I had always liked cooking. I was good at it. I had some savings from selling the pharmacy. And Chicago, from what I could see, was full of people who didn't have time to prepare home-cooked meals. Discussing this with Jeremy, I received enthusiastic support. "It's an excellent idea, Mom. I can help with the initial investment." But I didn't want to depend financially on my son. I wanted to do something on my own, prove to myself that I could start from scratch, build something with my own hands. Perhaps it was pride, or perhaps the need to show that life hadn't ended with widowhood and the move to the big city. After some research and conversations with Mrs. Conway, who knew many people in the neighborhood, I decided to open a restaurant. The investment would be too high. Instead, I started a small homemade meal service. I cooked right at home, in the apartment, and Mrs. Conway helped me with deliveries initially. I called the business Kentucky Comfort in homage to my roots. I started small, just 10 meals a day that I sold to local shopkeepers and to some of Jeremy's medical colleagues. but quality spoke louder, and soon word of mouth spread. In 6 months, I was already producing 50 meals daily. I had to hire 2 assistants and rent a small commercial kitchen 2 blocks from the apartment. The beef stew was, of course, the flagship dish. Even in Chicago, where people had access to all kinds of cuisine, my stew was a hit. Ironic to think that the same dish that for so many years was the symbol of my ignorance about Theodore's betrayal now became the symbol of my fresh start, my independence. It was through Kentucky Comfort that I met Marianne, Jeremy's future wife. She was a dietitian at the same hospital where he worked and came one day to see my kitchen, interested in recommending my meals for recovering patients who needed home-cooked, nutritious food. Tall, with curly hair and a radiant smile, Marianne won me over immediately. She had that uncomplicated way, that good energy that fills a room. I saw the sparkle in Jeremy's eyes when I introduced them and knew in that moment that something special was blooming there. Their courtship was quick and intense. In less than a year, they were engaged, and in July 1988, we celebrated their wedding. It was a simple but elegant ceremony, with few guests, mostly colleagues from the hospital and some friends we had made in Chicago. From Kentucky, only my sister Claudia and my dear friend Gertrude came for the celebration. During the reception, Gertrude pulled me into a quiet corner and handed me a yellowed envelope. "Martha, I kept this for years, waiting for the right moment. I think now, with Jeremy married and happy, you should have this." Inside the envelope was an old photograph, somewhat faded. It showed Darlene, Jeremy's biological mother, smiling timidly at the camera. She was pregnant, her belly already visible under the simple dress. "Where did you get this?" I asked, feeling a lump in my throat. "The day we followed Theodore to that little house, remember? While you were talking to the boy during your second visit, I took a look at his few belongings. I found this photo hidden inside a book. I thought I should keep it, that one day it would be important." I looked at that image for long minutes. Darlene looked so young, so fragile. I thought about how her life was unjustly cut short, how Theodore treated her like a shameful secret until the end. And I thought of Jeremy, who grew up without knowing his own mother's face, having only the locket with a picture too small to distinguish details. "I'm going to give this to him," I decided. "He deserves to have this memory." Gertrude squeezed my hand. "You have a huge heart, Martha. After everything you've been through, you still think of others' well-being." "It's not kindness," I replied honestly. "It's justice." Darlene may have been the pivot of Theodore's betrayal, but she was a victim as much as I was, perhaps even more so. That same night, after the party, I called Jeremy and Marianne for a private moment and gave him the photograph, explaining its origin. I saw his eyes fill with tears as he contemplated for the first time a clear image of his biological mother pregnant with him. "She's beautiful," he murmured. "Yes," I agreed, "and very kind too. She worked hard, never complained." "I think you inherited that from her, that silent determination." Jeremy hugged me tightly, without words. None were necessary. In that moment, I felt that a cycle was closing, that the wounds of the past never completely healed, at least no longer bled. The following years were ones of prosperity and joy. Kentucky Comfort grew, transforming into a real restaurant in 1990, specializing in Southern comfort food. Jeremy advanced in his medical career, becoming a respected surgeon. Marianne, always a partner, balanced her work as a dietitian with helping manage my restaurant. In 1991 came news that illuminated our lives even more. Marianne was pregnant, my first grandchild. The happiness I felt is indescribable. I, who could never bear a child in my womb, would now have a grandchild to spoil, to teach Southern recipes, to tell stories about the countryside. Thomas was born in February 1992, a strong boy with rosy cheeks and curious eyes. When I held him in my arms for the first time, I had a strange sensation. There was something familiar in that little face. "He has the mark," Jeremy commented, noticing my fixed gaze. On the right side of the baby's face, almost imperceptible, was the same birthmark that Theodore had, that Jeremy inherited, that all the men in the Wilson family had carried for generations. "The mark of the Wilsons," I whispered, remembering how this same mark was what first made me recognize Jeremy on that rainy night so long ago. Little Thomas brought a new dimension to our lives. Suddenly, the painful past seemed even more distant, as if the birth of that child had washed away the last stains of bitterness from my heart. The restaurant, which was already doing well, prospered even more. Perhaps because I cooked with renewed joy. Perhaps because customers loved seeing the baby I brought with me whenever I could. 3 years later, in 1995, my granddaughter Lucy was born. A smart girl with curly hair like her mother and the same radiant smile. Unlike her brother, she didn't have the Wilson family birthmark, but she carried in her large, expressive eyes the memory of Darlene. It was as if, through my grandchildren, the circle of life completed itself perfectly, bringing a bit of each person who had been part of our story. In 1998, when Thomas was 6 and Lucy was 3, something happened that caught me completely by surprise. A lady of about 70 appeared at the restaurant asking for me, tall, elegant, completely white hair. I had never seen her before. "Mrs. Wilson," she asked when I approached the table. "My name is Bernice Adams. I am Darlene's sister." I felt my legs weaken. In all those years, we had never known of the existence of Darlene's relatives. Theodore always said she was an orphan without family. "Please sit down," I invited, trying to maintain composure. "How did you find me?" "It wasn't easy," she sighed. "I spent years searching. I knew only that my sister had worked for a Wilson family in Oak Ridge and that she had disappeared. When I finally got information in town, they told me the pharmacist had died and his wife had moved to Chicago. It took me 3 more years to track you down to this restaurant." Bernice told me that she had lost contact with Darlene when she left the farm where they grew up to work in town. The letters, initially frequent, became rarer until they ceased completely. The family tried to find her, but without success. "I heard she had a son," said Bernice with teary eyes. "Is that true?" "Yes," I confirmed. "Jeremy. Today he's a doctor, married, has 2 beautiful children." The relief and emotion on that lady's face deeply moved me. I took my purse, removed my wallet, and showed her the most recent photo I had of Jeremy with Marianne and the children. "This is your nephew, and these are your grandnephew and grandniece." Bernice cried silently, looking at the photo for long minutes. "He looks like her," she whispered finally. "The same eyes." That afternoon, a new piece of the puzzle fell into place. Bernice told me about Darlene's childhood, about how she always dreamed of studying, of having a better life than the farm where they grew up. She also told me that their parents died, believing that their daughter had simply forgotten them after achieving a better life in the city. She would never do that, Bernice assured. Something must have happened for her to stop writing. And something had indeed happened. Theodore, the manipulation, the isolation, the control, typical of men like him who view vulnerable women as objects to be used and discarded. I arranged a meeting between Bernice and Jeremy for the following Sunday. It was one of the most emotional moments I have ever witnessed. Seeing my son, because that's how I always considered him, meet his aunt, hear stories about the mother he never knew, discover that he had cousins in Kentucky he didn't know existed. It was as if a lost piece of his identity finally found its place. Bernice's arrival brought a new dimension to our lives. Through her, Jeremy was able to learn about his maternal roots, understand where certain traits of his personality, certain preferences came from. The cousins, children of Darlene's siblings, came to visit us. Thomas and Lucy gained an extended family they didn't know they had. And I? Well, I gained a kind of peace I didn't know I still lacked. Seeing the story complete itself, seeing justice done to Darlene's memory, seeing Jeremy so fulfilled in all aspects of his life, it was as if the universe was finally in balance. In 2000, when the restaurant celebrated its 10th anniversary, we organized a big celebration party. Jeremy made a point of inviting all of Darlene's newly discovered family. In the center of the main table, I placed a special arrangement, a photo of Darlene, the one Gertrude had kept all those years, next to a recent photo of our entire extended family: Jeremy, Marianne, the children, me, Bernice, the cousins. It was Thomas, then 8 years old, who asked the innocent question that caught me off guard during the party. "Grandma, why do we never visit my other grandmother's grave? We visit Grandpa Theodore's every Memorial Day, but never my other grandmother's." The question silenced the table. Jeremy and I exchanged glances. It was true. Darlene didn't have a grave to visit. Theodore had buried her in haste, without ceremony, without a marker, in some unspecified place. One more indignity committed against that poor girl. "We don't know where she's buried, sweetheart," I answered honestly. It was Bernice who suggested we could make a memorial for her. It doesn't have to be a grave. It can be a beautiful place with flowers where we can go to remember her. The idea was embraced by everyone. The following month, in a tranquil area of Oakwood Cemetery, we inaugurated a small memorial for Darlene. A simple plaque with her full name and dates of birth and death, surrounded by blue hydrangeas. We discovered through Bernice that they were her favorite flowers. During the small ceremony, I observed Jeremy's face. There was a serenity there I had never seen before, as if a cycle finally closed, as if an invisible wound finally healed. And observing that scene, my adoptive son paying homage to the biological mother he never knew, alongside the family we had built together, I felt a deep certainty. True love always finds a way through pain, through lies, through betrayals. It persists, transforms, creates new bonds where old ones were broken. Fate has these ironies, doesn't it? A bowl of beef stew revealed the greatest betrayal of my life, but it also brought me my greatest blessing: Jeremy. The pain of discovering that my husband was hiding a child outside of marriage transformed into the joy of being a mother, even if not by the path I had imagined. And now, so many years later, this same dish was the flagship of the restaurant I had built with my own hands, a symbol of my independence and overcoming. If someone had told me on that rainy night in 1972 that one day I would be in Chicago, the owner of a successful restaurant, surrounded by a loving family that included my husband's hidden son, his wife, my grandchildren, and even the family of the woman with whom I was betrayed, well, I would have thought this person completely crazy. But life, my dears, life always surprises us, knocks us down, challenges us, makes us bleed, but also offers us new paths, second chances, unexpected fresh starts. The years go by so quickly, don't they? It seems like yesterday that I moved to Chicago, that I opened my little meal service, that I held my first grandchild in my arms. And when we realize it, here we are at 78, looking back and trying to understand the meaning of everything we've lived through. My Kentucky Comfort restaurant prospered beyond my most optimistic expectations. From a small establishment in Lincoln Park, we expanded to 3 locations in Chicago. In 2005, at 70, I decided it was time to pass the baton. Marianne, who had always shown a talent for business, took over general management. Lucy, my granddaughter, who was already 13 at the time, began to show the same interest in cooking that I had always had. "Grandma, teach me how to make beef stew just like yours," she asked me one day. "I want to learn all your secrets." Seeing my granddaughter interested in perpetuating the culinary traditions I brought from Kentucky filled me with pride. In the following years, I made a point of passing on to her not just the recipes, but the stories behind each dish, the small details that make all the difference, the love that should season every pot. Today, at 23, Lucy is a trained chef with a specialization in Southern cuisine. She took over the main kitchen of the restaurant and implemented innovations that would never have occurred to me. The menu now includes modern versions of traditional dishes, vegetarian options, even a vegan beef stew that is surprisingly delicious. "You're not upset about the changes, Grandma?" she asked worriedly when she presented the new menu. My dear, I replied, tradition only stays alive when it manages to renew itself. If I had clung to the past, I would never have left Oakridge, never would have built all this. Thomas, my oldest grandchild, followed a different path. From a young age, he showed the same interest in medicine as Jeremy. He accompanied his father on some shifts, asked questions, devoured books about the human body. Today, at 26, he's already a trained doctor and is in residency in pediatric surgery. Grandma, I chose pediatrics because I want to make a difference in children's lives, he explained to me when he decided on his specialization. I want them to have the chance to grow up healthy, happy, surrounded by love, as I had. Seeing my grandchildren forge their own paths, building their lives based on the values we tried to impart, is the greatest satisfaction I could have. After all, what other legacy can we leave in this world but the love we plant in the hearts of those who come after us? Jeremy, my son in heart, has become one of the most respected surgeons in Chicago. At 57, he's at the peak of his career, coordinates a residency program at the hospital, has published books, gives lectures throughout the United States. When I see him speaking with such confidence and knowledge, I think of that frightened boy I found in that little house at the edge of Oakridge. How surprising life is in its paths. Our relationship with Darlene's family strengthened over the years. Bernice, her sister, unfortunately passed away in 2010, but the cousins maintain close contact. We make a point of gathering at least twice a year, on Jeremy's birthday and at Christmas. These are noisy gatherings, full of stories, laughter, and of course, plenty of good food. In 2012, something unexpected happened. We received a letter from Oakridge. It was from Gertrude, my faithful friend, the only person from that era with whom I still maintained some contact. The letter said that the old Wilson pharmacy, which I had sold after Theodore's death, was being demolished to make way for a modern drugstore. During the construction, workers found something hidden in a false wall at the back of the establishment, a locked metal box. Since I was the last owner, the city hall contacted Gertrude, who still lived in town, to try to locate me. My friend promptly provided my address in Chicago, and 2 weeks later, the box arrived by mail. I gathered the family in the living room of the apartment where I live with Jeremy and Marianne to open that relic from the past. The lock was rusted, difficult to open. When we finally managed, we discovered a treasure trove of memories, old photographs, documents, letters, and a diary. Theodore's diary. "Would you like to be alone to read it?" Jeremy asked, sensing the emotion that overcame me. "No," I replied. "Whatever is in here belongs to all of us. They're pieces of our family puzzle." We spent hours examining the contents of that box. The photographs revealed a young, smiling Theodore alongside Darlene. They looked happy, in love. There were records of her pregnant at different stages, the same images that Theodore hid from me while keeping the son of both isolated in that precarious little house. But it was the diary that really illuminated the dark corners of our story. Theodore began writing it in 1955 when he met Darlene. She was only 16, coming from the countryside to work in the city. He, at 25, was already the respected pharmacist of Oakridge, heir to a prosperous business. The romance began months before she came to work in our house. Theodore met her at church, was enchanted by her simple beauty, her shyness, her vulnerability. They began to meet in secret. He, the son of the local elite. She, the poor girl without family in town. When Darlene became pregnant in 1956, Theodore panicked. His parents would never accept such a humble daughter-in-law, a girl without a last name, without a dowry, without formal education. And the conservative society of Oakridge would crucify both for the sin of having a child out of wedlock. That's when Theodore's father intervened. Discovering his son's affair with the maid, he issued an ultimatum. Either Theodore ended everything and sent the girl away, or he would be disinherited, lose the pharmacy, be expelled from the family. The young man, cowardly and materialistic, yielded to pressure, but couldn't simply abandon Darlene and the child that was to come. So, he set up a double life. He kept Darlene hidden, supporting her minimally, while fulfilling the expectations of family and society. When his parents decided it was time for him to marry, they presented me as the ideal candidate. Daughter of a good family, well-educated, with good manners. The arranged marriage would be the perfect solution to settle their son and end any rumors about his involvement with a maid. Theodore agreed to marry me without love, merely for social and economic convenience. In the diary, he described his internal conflict, the guilt for deceiving everyone, the love he still felt for Darlene, the contempt he nurtured for himself for not having the courage to defy his father and society. Darlene's death in childbirth was the blow that broke him inside. In the pages of the diary, he described the despair of seeing her bleeding, powerless to help, afraid to call a doctor and expose the situation. When she passed away, 3 days after giving birth to Jeremy, something also died inside Theodore. "I buried Darlene at dawn, alone," he wrote. "Without a priest, without prayers, without a headstone, just me, the shovel, and the fine rain that fell like tears from heaven. May God forgive me for this final indignity. May Darlene forgive me for not having the courage to love her as she deserved." Reading those words after so many years evoked conflicting feelings in me. Anger at Theodore's cowardice, sadness for Darlene's wasted life, gratitude that Jeremy had survived it all. But surprisingly, I also felt a kind of compassion for the man who was my husband, not to justify his actions, but to understand the prison he himself created with his misguided choices. At the end of the diary, we found a letter addressed to Jeremy, dated 1984, a year before Theodore's death. It was never delivered. In it, the father asked his son for forgiveness for everything, for keeping him hidden, for denying him the name, for depriving him of a normal family. And he thanked me with words I never heard personally. "Martha did for you what I didn't have the courage to do. She gave you love, dignity, a future. She is more your father than I ever was. I hope someday you can forgive me, but I'll understand if that never happens." Jeremy cried as he read those lines. At 57, he was finally receiving the request for forgiveness that he had perhaps unconsciously always waited for. I don't know if he really forgave his father. Some wounds are too deep to heal completely, but I saw that the letter brought a kind of peace he didn't know he needed. Together, we decided to do something meaningful with that discovery. First, we identified the exact location where Darlene was buried through a rudimentary map found among Theodore's papers. It was a piece of land at the back of the old Wilson family property, today a residential area. With the authorities' permission, we exhumed Darlene's remains and transferred them to Oakwood Cemetery, next to the memorial we had created years before. Finally, she would have a dignified resting place where we could bring flowers, light candles, pay the tributes she was denied in life. Then we donated part of the money found in the box, there was a considerable amount in old securities and gold, to a foundation that supports single mothers in vulnerable situations. The rest was used to create a scholarship in Darlene's name at the medical school where Thomas studied, a way to perpetuate her name, to give other young women the opportunities that were taken from her. As for the diary and photographs, we decided to preserve them as a record of our family history, not to cling to the painful past, but to remember the path we traveled, the difficulties we overcame, the lessons we learned. On a Thursday afternoon a few months ago, we gathered the entire family at the original Kentucky Comfort restaurant, 3 generations around the same table, myself, Jeremy and Marianne, Thomas and his fiancée Patricia, Lucy and her boyfriend Raphael, some cousins from Darlene's family. The reason for the gathering? To celebrate the 50 years since that rainy night when I followed Theodore and discovered the secret that would change our lives forever. As part of the celebration, I personally prepared the beef stew. Even at 78, with hands no longer as steady as before, I made a point of cooking that symbolic dish. Lucy assisted me, learning the last details she hadn't yet captured. When everyone was served, I raised my glass for a toast. To life that surprises us in the most unexpected moments, to the pains that teach us to value joys, to the mistakes that show us new paths, and to the love that persists, that transforms, that heals. Looking at those dear faces around the table, I thought about how a story that began with so much sadness, betrayal, abandonment, lies, ended up generating so much love, so much life. I thought of Theodore, of Darlene, of how their choices, right or wrong, led to the existence of all those wonderful people gathered there. And I thought of myself, the young 37-year-old Martha, who on a rainy night discovered the bitter truth about her marriage. How far she was from imagining that that painful revelation would actually be the beginning of a journey of growth, strength, and unconditional love. That night, after everyone left, I stayed alone in the restaurant for a few minutes. I took a small portion of the beef stew that remained and placed it in a simple container, like the ones Theodore used to take to Jeremy. I went out to the street and looked at the starry Chicago sky. "Thank you," I whispered to the universe. I didn't know exactly who I was thanking. God, fate, the circumstances that brought me here. Perhaps all of them, perhaps myself, for having had the courage to transform pain into strength, resentment into compassion, betrayal into a new beginning. Today, when I prepare beef stew on Thursdays, a ritual I maintain to this day, I no longer think about Theodore's betrayal. I think about the family we built, the bonds we created, the love that flourished from the ashes of a destroyed marriage. I think about how a simple dish can carry so many meanings, so many memories, so many interwoven stories. And that's what I want to leave with you, my dears, who have accompanied me this far. The certainty that our lives are not defined by the bad things that happen to us, but by how we respond to them. We can surrender to bitterness, resentment, self-pity. Or we can use the pain as fuel to rise again, to create something new and beautiful from the rubble. My story began with a betrayal discovered because of a bowl of stew, but it doesn't end there. It continues in the smiles of my grandchildren, in my son's success, in the restaurant that brings a piece of Kentucky to Chicagoans, in the lives we've touched along the way. And now it continues with you who have heard my account and I hope will take something valuable from it. Perhaps the courage to face your own pains. Perhaps the inspiration to start over after a fall. Perhaps just the certainty that you are not alone in your struggles. Before ending this final video in the series, I want to ask you to leave in the comments the lessons you took from this story. What touched your heart the most? What will you take with you? And if you have similar stories of overcoming, share those too. We're stronger when we share our experiences. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And keep an eye out, because soon I'll be starting a new series of stories, because at 78, I have many to tell. Until our next meeting, my dears, may God bless each of your paths. And remember, life has many Thursdays ahead, many bowls of stew to be prepared, many stories to be written. Make yours something worth telling one day.